Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 182. I'm Enigmius and today we're continuing with our USS Discovery build, although I don't think we're going to be able to call it the Discovery for much longer. We're still working on the saucer section. We're working on this largest ring of the saucer section, the outermost ring. If you haven't seen the series, if you haven't seen the last two episodes, we're building the saucer section of a relatively new ship design. It's part of a ship in a series that just started a few weeks ago, something like that. It's got a central a central sphere, and then around it it's got two rings. If you think like rings around Saturn, a small one and a large one. In the last couple of episodes, we've done the layout for the rings, and then we started working on the upper and lower plates for the largest of the two. The reason I decided to do that one is, one, it would create this sense of progress a little bit sooner than if we started with the small one. And after everything that was involved in getting the whole thing up and running, it was nice to get that sense of progress starting to fall into place. The other reason is because it's probably the most involved out of all of the different saucer components that we'll be working on. The inner section, the inner ring, is not going to be especially difficult to do. This sphere in the middle will involve a little bit of work and a little bit of thought and head scratching, but it's not a large piece, which means progress and revisions happen much faster than they do on something like this. So the sooner we get this part done, the sooner we're on easy street as far as the saucer section goes, because everything else will be easy in comparison. So what I'm doing now, as you can see, is we're filling in the gaps between the top plate and the lower plate, or the bottom plate, I guess would be the proper way to describe it. It's not a very big gap, but it's going around a circle, which is what makes it a little bit challenging. And I decided, just to get things going with this particular part of the build, it would be easier to just sort of rough it in, get it into place in a very simple way, and then take a look at what we need to do in order to refine it to bring it up to a better standard, as opposed to just kind of plunking things down and leaving it, hoping that everything will work out if nobody notices all the things that we didn't do. In this case, it's not actually that bad. Once I got going on it, one of the things that I found, you can see I'm going around and I'm removing all of the temporary blocks that I had to place in order to place the larger of those sloped blocks. There was otherwise nothing to attach them to, so sometimes you have to place a block somewhere so that you can attach a block for the structure, but the first block that you placed doesn't have a reason to be there once you've got the other one attached. So that's what we're doing here, is we're going around getting rid of those. I find whenever I use temporary blocks, even when we do the layout for the circles, we always have at least one cube overlapping each segment on the circle, because otherwise you have nothing to attach the next segment to. It's always easier to go around as soon as possible and remove them than it is to leave things and try and do it all later, doing the removal of the temporary blocks, because sometimes it gets really easy to lose sight of what you're supposed to remove and what you're supposed to keep. It may sound kind of silly, especially in this particular example where we were removing a very oddly placed slope block that wouldn't make sense to be there for any other reason. But when you're working with cubes and when you're working with other kinds of blocks, it's frightfully easy to lose track of exactly what it is that you're doing. It didn't take us long, but you can sort of see most of the work now is done. Most of the structure of this outer sort of wall, I guess you could say, is taken care of. The challenging aspect is that I noticed when I was looking at the drawings or the diagrams for the ship that it had that little bit of a slope to it. We couldn't just do straight down, do another circle and kind of smooth it off the way that we do. So having it roughed in the way that we did, where we're just following the same segments of the circle that we laid out, bringing it down on that specific angle, and then coming back now and doing what we can to smooth the transition between those segments, because we've got them offset by one block. Every time we change a segment, we offset by one block, usually in, stepping in from the previous one. So by going around and adding in these compound 22.5 degree blocks They've got the 22.5 degree slope, but they're also angled at 45 degrees. We can put those in between the segments, and now we've got a complete looking structure. It's not a perfect circle. It never will be in a voxel universe. I shouldn't say that. It's possible someday, but not today. Not with this game. We have to work with what we've got. So we're never going to have the perfect curve in this game around a circle this size. There's going to be steps. There's going to be visible segments that go around. But what we want to do is smooth off those edges on those segments as best we can so that things flow together a little bit better. They look a little bit more complete. And when we're done that, we get into this position where we look at what we built, this great big giant saucer section. And if you can overlook the fact that it's not a perfect circle, it actually looks pretty good. It's one of those interesting kinds of things. And the acid test, one of the things that I discovered was very helpful is to travel around the circle so that you've got a view where you can see one edge at all times, and you just go around the circle and see how that transition works on that very edge that you can see. You're not worried about what's in front of you, just off to the side. And if it looks smooth and if it looks even, you win. That's basically the way that it works, which in this case wound up being the scenario. It was fairly well executed. We have the option, of course, this early in the build, we can make revisions if we want. But now we're going to move on to the inside wall, this inside segment between the top and the bottom plates for the ring. This is a little bit different in the profile. The first one was just a single angle, sliding in a little bit from the top to the bottom. This one has got sort of a curved transition down and in, and then it's got the same thing going the other way, up and in on the underside. So they kind of meet in the middle, and there's a little narrow section that's pretty much vertical, straight up and down. And I wanted to duplicate that as closely as I could because it ties into how the two saucer sections are joined together. Now, the large section isn't floating independently of the small one. There are 4 little structural segments that extend out between the two at the 45 degree angle marks, so not perpendicular or parallel to anything, they're just off on an angle. If that's not making sense, it will when you see it. So there is a physical structural link between the large and the small segments, independently of anything that might be going on underneath the main hull when we get towards the back. And I wanted to make sure that we were setting ourselves up for those segments to fit together nicely with everything and be believable and be as true to the authentic version, the actual ship with those segments, as we possibly could. The difficulty with getting this sort of laid out in a way that I felt I could be happy with is that it's very time consuming to find images of the ship above and below, obviously not at the same time, but just to make sure that you've got the right take on what the profile is above and below, because there's also a version of the ship that you see in early drawings before the series. They were sort of like prototype drawings where all of the saucer section segments are physically joined all the way around, just like any other Star Trek saucer section that you've ever seen. It's just in the newer iteration, the one that actually made it into the series, where they're not joined together. So there's always that sort of conflict when you're looking around for images, whether you get the new one or the old one. And if you get the new one, do you get the right angle from above or below to be able to get a good look at what that profile is? So it took a little while to sort of get it figured out. But now that we've got it, it's not going to take long to implement. And I think it should be pretty successful in the grand scheme of things. Now, you'll notice possibly the way things are flitting around, it might be a little bit difficult to see, but we've still got the circle that we used to lay out the upper plate and the bottom plate that we're working with. So when we first started doing the layout of the ship, we did the circles sort of like on a horizontal plane, just 2D, so that we could get an idea of where things would be. And we've still got that there. But the way that this whole thing came together with the inside wall, we're not necessarily going to be relying 100% on that. That can change once we've got everything else in place. You can see in terms of getting everything to blend the way that I want it to, it's exactly the same process as what we were doing on the outside. We've got all of these segments that are offset by one block. Every time we change to a different segment, there's a one block offset, and we want to smooth it off so that it looks more complete. We don't want those 90-degree sort of transitions. And all we need to do in order to make that happen is remove one strip of blocks, or one column, I guess would be a reasonable way to describe it, and then replace it with the blocks that are necessary in order to make it look a little bit more smooth. And you can see this is right in the 45-degree part of the arc coming around the circle. This is where we can sort of flatten it out a little bit, have it look a little bit more convincing. And you can see what I mean. It doesn't take a whole lot. And the pattern is repeated identically every time we do one of these little columns. Every time we remove it, we're placing the same blocks in the same places, maybe just turned 90 degrees, relative to the ones that we had placed before. But it's not like we have to come up with a new way to transition each segment. So it tends to work out really well. You can see here I've basically gone around and removed a bunch of the things that we had to remove in order to make room for these transitional bits. And we're using the exact same blocks over and over and over again, to the extent that I'm switching to one block and I'm placing it across all of these, and then I switch to the other and I place it on all of them. I don't have to turn them. I don't have to do anything. It's very, very simple and straightforward. The nice thing about it, like I keep saying, is that this is early enough in the project. If I come up with any brilliant ideas to make it better than what it is now, that's great. But as it sits, I'm already pretty happy with it. The only thing that I have left to do now is duplicate this upper section that I've done block for block on the underside, and that will be the inner wall section between the bottom and the top plates taken care of. Not bad at all. The last thing that I wanted to do was deal with this overhang that we've got. You can see the way we've got these narrow slope blocks coming over the edge. It's like a half block overhang with every single one of these blocks. You could keep it that way. I think that there would be merit to that approach. I don't think it would necessarily be a bad decision to leave it that way, but the thought occurred to me that we could get a little bit closer conformity to this whole idea that it's a smooth transition around these edges if we switch things around just a little bit and got things a little bit closer to that wall section between the top and the bottom lining up with the plates above and below. It's not going to be perfect. Again, voxel circle, nothing will be perfect, but this is another example of where you can come around and basically travel around the ship looking at the edge and see whether or not it's a smooth transition all the way around, and in this case it was. So I think we're in sort of a winning position here. Just have to keep doing that all the way around. The last thing that I wanted to do, I know we've done so many different things this episode, it's fantastic, is I wanted to get this texture in place. This is the texture that I've decided that I want to at least try early on. Not because of what it is now, but because of what I'm expecting it will be when Alpha 7 hits. And the textures are going to pop a little bit more. They're going to be a little bit more distinct with the 3D elements, where you've got sort of obvious lines now, and you can see actually the light will glint off some of those lines in the existing textures. They should be much more pronounced in Alpha 7, and I wanted to kind of have at least some in place so that I could do a comparison and go from there. So plenty more to do to get things ready for transitioning to the inner circle, but for now the outer circle, I think we're making very, very good progress. So that'll be it for this episode. If you want to be notified about the next episode and future episodes in the series, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.